Judgment and dream burst at the seams, break me in two, split me apart, open my heart. Judgment and dream burst at the seams, break me in two, split me apart, open my heart. Judgment and dream burst at the seams, break me in two, split me apart, open my heart. Naked, consumed, burning into the night. Part of a universe made of pure light. Standing alone with the world by my side. Spirit now soaring along for the ride. Well, cast out your logs, throw your cross on the pine. Nothing consumes a woman on fire. The crackling flames are a heavenly choir. I'm a woman on fire. Thank you all so much. This is beautiful. We're going to play a video now that expresses a little bit more fully the program that I've been running, and now I've launched a crowdfunding campaign to take our One Village music project that unites teens from all over the world in creating heart-centered music in a way that can be heard by the mass. And so, here's my video.
I believe it's possible to heal the world with music. My name is Phoebe Hunt, and I've been playing the violin since as long as I can remember, and performing for at least a decade. But 3 years ago, I was inspired in a whole new way. I went to my first Global Youth Peace Summit held by the Amala Foundation outside of Austin, Texas, and my heart was blown open.
At the summit, teenagers from all around the world come together to learn about how peace begins within.
It starts with a heartbeat, pulls on my heartstrings.
And it was here that I saw a young Pakistani boy playing tabla to the sunset. I heard the voices of girls from the Congo singing traditional music they had learned in refugee camp, and thought of how powerful it could be for these teens to come together and collaborate musically to document this beautiful togetherness. If only they had the opportunity.
So I dreamed up Fuel Our Fire, calling in the music community that I have come to know and love in support of programs that heal the world through music.
Singing from my soul.
It seems like everyone I told my vision to was inspired to help. Local music venues and studios donated their time. Local eateries donated food. Videographers, photographers, and designers donated their services. Other professional musicians came in as coaches, and together we created our first program, the One Village Music Project. The One Village Music Project is a week-long program that unites teen musicians from all around the world and offers a professional, safe, and creative space for them to collaborate by writing and recording original music in the name of peace and connection.
Like a river down to the sea, cadence in your words, song in your touch, set to a tempo I want so much. There's a rhythm
In 2013, at our first program, we came together with the goal of recording one song, and at the end of the week, we had recorded an 8-song album, Precious Human Life. Last year, our program expanded, and the One Village Music Project was held in both Santa Rosa, California, and Austin, Texas, immediately following the 2 Global Youth Peace Summits. You're listening to clips from our unreleased album right now.
Show up in your truth. You have nothing to lose.
I have seen what is possible when a local community comes together with a common goal. Now, I wonder what is possible when I reach out to my global community.
The money we raise through this campaign will fund the creative energy that it takes to make our programs possible, giving jobs to many talented and creative people who also believe in the power of music. Our goal is to release an album each year written by the youth who attend the Global Youth Peace Summit, as well as to further expand, creating more programs that utilize the healing powers of music. Check out the perks that we are offering for your donations. You can get anything from copies of the albums we create to name recognition or logo placement on future albums, shining a light on you or your company as a supporter of global unity. Some of you may even want to get a VIP seat to witness firsthand the magic of the studio.
By reaching our stretch goal of $100,000 or more with this campaign, we will work to sustain our programs for the next decade to come. Thank you for your time. And please share this video with anyone you know who understands and loves the value of music education. And let's watch as the One Village Music Project plays its part in healing the world with music.
There we go. Got it. Good morning. Well, I wanted to have an opportunity to share that possibility with you because it just to me speaks of what we also teach in Unity is our oneness and our connection and how we can come together. And so I was grateful that Phoebe actually shared that with me and that we had the opportunity to share it with you this morning. Today's talk came about in a very real way because of our auction that we had months and months ago to help create this space. You guys remember, some of you were here, you remember our auction? Well, one of the things that I offered was to do a Sunday lesson of someone's choice. And so that person called in that gift that I donated. They bid for it and won it. And so they asked me to do a talk on boundaries. And they happen to not be here today because we didn't communicate that I was going to do it this weekend, and they were going to be away. But they're going to be able to watch it on the video, they said, and they were very happy with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of boundaries. And what really came to me when I thought about this idea of boundaries, it is actually one of the things that's probably one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and for others. And it's also sometimes one of the most challenging things to do because we're generally, unless we come up in a particular family that actually has very good, healthy boundaries, we don't learn those very well. Because that's really one of the best ways to learn healthy boundaries is to come up in a family that has those. Well, I'm going to suggest that there's a lot of families that have never really learned that over the years. Wouldn't you agree? And, it's variations of, shades of gray, you might say, of how much we are able to learn and set boundaries for ourselves and others in our lives. What I want to start off, and the title that came to me about this is The Sacred Art of Yes and No. Setting Boundaries in a Boundless Universe. And what came to me was the verse from Matthew chapter 5, verse 34 through 37. But I say to you, do not take oaths at all, not by heaven because it is the throne of God, not by earth because it is his footstool, and not by Jerusalem because it is the city of the great king. Do not take any vow by your head because you are not able to make one hair white or black. I'm working on that one, however, without coloring, of course, no. But Jesus went on to say, let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. More than this is from evil. Now, I want to say a little bit more about that. So, as I look at the understanding of this, I really, this is a very powerful spiritual principle that Jesus is teaching. Let your words be yes or no. Anything more from that, he says, is evil. Now, the word that's been translated as evil really basically means untruth. It doesn't necessarily relate as, in fact, some translations say it is of the evil one. And so there's still this projection out there of this idea of this being called the devil. But I'm going to suggest to you that that's a way that was tried to be explained during that time, and it was very common for the culture of that time to create images of beings based on certain characters and characteristics. And the devil is one of those. It's an archetypal image, but the devil is basically a belief system of untruth that's really not in alignment and in harmony with the truth of being, with the divine. Something that is, in some ways, expressing something that is somewhat counter to the divine presence. Well, the reality is, and we know and we've learned in unity, that really, ultimately, there is nothing that is outside or is not in alignment with the divine presence. Because there really is only one presence and one power in the universe, and there is really nothing outside of that. And so what is he saying here? What he's saying, to me, is that anything that we're saying that is beyond the yes and no in life is really trying to say in some ways that there really is something outside of the divine presence. And so part of what we're learning to do in terms of setting boundaries is learning to align ourselves with the truth of our being. And it's one of the most important things that we can learn in life. And yet it's also one of the most challenging things we can learn, because we're taught out here in the world so many times in so many ways things that are not in alignment with that presence and that power and that light that is the truth of who and what we are and what we've come here to be and what we've come here to express. So I like stories. I like to start off with stories. Recently, I came across a really interesting little anecdote. KGO Radio in San Francisco apparently conducted a call-in poll. And the host, Ron Owens, invited the listeners to come in and express their opinions in this call-in poll. And 35% of them said yes, and 33% of them said no. And 32% of them were undecided. And then one listener called in and was just ranting and raving about, this is the problem with our country. There's so much apathy in this country that people just cannot make up their mind. They cannot decide. The problem with his argument was that they never actually asked a question. They just asked people to vote yes or no. And everybody had an opinion or couldn't decide. Yes or no. I thought that was an interesting phenomenon. How often do we answer the question that's never been asked in life? We oftentimes find ourselves reacting and responding to what we think is the question. And our answer is usually yes, no, or I don't know. Wouldn't you agree? I thought that was a great story. Well, I came another good little story about the professional golfer Tommy Bolt was playing in Los Angeles, and he had a caddy that had a reputation for just constant chatter. And if any of you have ever played golf, you really don't want a lot of constant chatter when you're trying to putt or when you're trying to drive. You really want quiet and center and focus. And so before he teed off, Bolt told the caddy, don't say a word to me. And if I ask you something, just answer yes or no. And the caddy agreed. And so they went during played a round or two, and then during the round, Bolt found a ball next to the tree, and where he had hit under a branch, and it was like over a lake, and he had to shoot through the branch and onto the green. And so he got on his knees and was kind of looking to see how he could make this shot, and asked the caddy, well, what do you think? A 5-iron? And the caddy goes, no. Mr. Bolt said, well, what do you know? So he thought to himself, what does he know? So he grabbed his 5-iron and he goes and he makes this shot, and he makes this beautiful shot, and it lands about 2 feet from the hole. Really difficult shot. And he said to the caddy then, well, what do you think about that? He said, well, now you can talk. He said, well, Mr. Bolt, that was a beautiful shot, but that wasn't your ball. There are times when it's appropriate to be able to say yes and no, and it's time that I guess we do need to say a little bit more than that, perhaps. So I've been thinking about this idea of saying yes and no in life, and it is one of the most important and significant spiritual practices and principles that we have. You know, in Unity, we talk about the idea of affirmations and denials. And really, if you really think about it, that's exactly what we're doing. We're really saying simply yes or no. And when we look at what's going on in our thoughts and thinking, it's important for us to learn the practice of saying yes or no, isn't it? But how oftentimes do we simply let thoughts run through our head that we don't really say yes or no to? Sometimes we say yes to thoughts that really have no basis in truth, and sometimes we say no to thoughts that are absolutely true, don't we? Sometimes we say no to our unlimitedness. Sometimes we say no to our connections. And sometimes we say yes to our limits, to our fears, to our anxieties. And so a big part of the spiritual practice is this very simple thing of saying yes and no. And I really do believe that this is the essence of what Jesus was trying to teach us, that really all of life is really answering this question for ourselves in a very deep way. But I got to thinking about it more even in terms of the idea of personal boundaries. And it's a challenge that I think that a lot of us face in life, because we're not really taught real well how to honor those yes and no's, to really ask those questions and to be comfortable and to be safe and to feel safe in saying those two words. I thought about personal boundaries and I came across this definition. They're guidelines and rules or limits that a person creates to identify for themselves what are reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave around them, and how they will respond when someone steps outside of those limits or those boundaries. And they're built out of a mix of beliefs, opinions, attitudes, past experiences, and social learning. So according to some in the counseling profession, personal boundaries help us define an individual by outlining likes and dislikes, setting the distance one allows others to approach, and they include physical, mental, psychological, and spiritual boundaries involving beliefs, emotions, intuitions, and self-esteem. Got all that? Good definition, huh? But it really is kind of this idea, this understanding that we do actually need in this life and in this world to understand and set healthy boundaries. And setting healthy boundaries is sometimes a challenge to comprehend and understand, because we're spiritual beings and we recognize that we're all one, right? We are all one, and it's important for us to understand that in that oneness we are boundless, and yet part of our work in this life and this world is to experience and express our individuality within that oneness. So it doesn't tap away from the connections that we have and the oneness that we have, but it actually can add to it by helping us to really express more of our authentic nature and connection with the unique expression of the divine that we're called to be a part of, that we're called to do. According to Nina Brown, who wrote this wonderful book called Whose Life Is It Anyway?, there are 4 main types of psychological boundaries. She calls them a soft boundary. And this is a person who has soft boundaries, merges with other people's boundaries. They kind of don't really understand or know where their boundaries are, where someone else's boundaries are. Someone with a soft boundary is easily a victim or is easily manipulated or easily pulled into being and doing what others want rather than doing what really is in alignment with themselves. I think we all follow into that at times in life and have fallen into it. Then there's those who have spongy boundaries. Spongy boundaries are a person with boundaries like a combination of having soft and rigid boundaries. So they're either very soft and they just go along with everything and anything anybody else wants, or then they automatically are not going to do anything anybody else wants. It's, absolutely rigid and cannot do anything that is, that anyone else wants or suggests. They permit less emotional contagion, she calls it. So soft boundaries spongy boundaries are kind of a back and forth. They're unsure of what to let in and what to let out in their lives. And then there's the rigid boundaries. We know about those, right? We all have seen and experienced people who have very, very rigid boundaries. A person with rigid boundaries is very closed or walled off, and so nobody can get close to them. They're either physically or emotionally unapproachable, or they do not connect. They often are, but they also oftentimes are, have been people who have been abused or hurt or wounded in some way, and so they are using those boundaries as a way to defend themselves from ever being hurt or wounded again. What we recognize in unity, though, is that when we hold on to those kinds of experiences and we set those kind of rigid boundaries, we're actually creating an energy that oftentimes helps create even more of those kinds of experiences in life. Isn't that true? And then there are those who have what we call flexible boundaries. And there's a difference between spongy boundaries and flexible boundaries. And the flexible boundaries they're selective, rigid boundaries at times, but the person has more say and control of how they're setting those boundaries. In other words, they are not automatic knee-jerk response to a situation or circumstance. I have experienced in my life a number of people that were close to me that when you ask them something, you make a request, their automatic initial response is no. Have you ever had experiences like that? Their automatic response is no, but then later on they may consider and think about it and they may actually go forward with it. But there is a reactive experience, and that's someone with a rigid boundary. It's not something that's really contemplated or thought about. It really is something that is a reaction to a particular past experience, for that matter, a hurt or a wound from the past. And so maybe you recognize some of this in yourself. It's oftentimes we find ourselves being asked or requested or something that is brought to us, and our immediate response is no. Well, it's valuable for us to take time to look at that and listen to where that no is really coming from. Is it really having to do with the experience that in this moment, or really is it something that's triggered from a past experience? So flexible boundaries, the person decides to let in what they want. They make a decision about it. They listen perhaps within themselves, and they're able to discern, is this really something that is what I want, is highest and best for myself and for the other? Or is it simply a response, a reactive response to something that I fear in this particular circumstance or situation? So thinking about the idea of yes and no, I was blessed with listening to a wonderful interview this week from Cheryl Richardson, and she had some great ideas and some insights about this whole awareness about setting boundaries. And she basically says that no is is important to us for setting boundaries, and it creates these perimeters for ourselves so that we can really experience and understand what it is and who and what we truly are. And she says it actually becomes more important to us the older we get, that setting those boundaries for ourselves actually even becomes more important as we begin to age in life. Ultimately, she said it's there for the purpose of protecting the soul. And I thought that was a really interesting awareness. Personal boundaries, I think, are there for the purpose of protecting the soul, protecting that part of ourselves that which is our unique individual nature. But it's oftentimes challenging for us to really come up with that. How many of you feel really comfortable saying no? Yeah, that's good. How many of you do not feel comfortable at all saying no? You don't have to raise your hand, but you may. Yeah, working on it. Sometimes it's a matter of learning to let go of the discomfort that we feel when we say no. Because we oftentimes have experiences as we're growing up that have made it not, quote, okay for us to say no. We feel early on in life, and usually a lot of this comes from very early in life, that she gives an example of a crying baby. Oftentimes you'll have a crying baby that doesn't have the verbal ability to express what they want, either a yes or a no. But when they're crying, the response oftentimes is from the parent an energy of no. They don't want you crying. Or let me put it myself in the other position here. As a parent, oftentimes when you hear a crying baby, the idea is to try and get the baby to stop crying, right? Oftentimes that's picked up as a no, and so the energy that's received is it's not okay to express. It's not okay to say what to express because I don't have the ability, then it's not okay to do that. And so oftentimes we take that in as it's not okay to say what it is that we truly want. We're not okay if we express in some way, either yes or no. And so it's valuable for us to take time to really be open to healing much of that energy that we have about our past experiences. Sometimes Louise Hay basically says that you can look out even at a school playground, and you will find that most of us, when we were growing up on the school playground, got almost, I think she said, almost 100 no's to every yes that we got on the playground. Think about that for a moment. And so oftentimes when we listen to and do kind of things that we are inspired to do or even impetuously do, we're given a no, and rather than saying that is a no to that particular action or behavior, we hear it as a no to the self. And we take that in as a no to ourselves, and then we find it more difficult to say no to others because we know how it felt when we, hello. Let's say no to that. And yes to clear. So we find it difficult to say no to others because we project onto others the feelings that we had in those early experiences of what it felt like to be said no to. And so part of our work in learning to grow spiritually is to become comfortable with who and what we truly are and want and desire and feel in our lives, and at the same time be able to set the limits of what we are willing to say yes to and able to say yes to. Now, one of the things that came to me about this is that learning to say yes to those things of spirit is probably one of the most valuable things that we can learn also, isn't it? We have, and oftentimes we get confronted with circumstances and situations that are there to help us grow and help us to expand our possibilities in life. Can you think of circumstances in your life where you have been challenged and you said no to them, but if you had said yes, it might have grown you into a new place? Or can you think of circumstances and situations in your life where you had experiences where you were being challenged and you went ahead and said yes to it, and then you found yourself being able to expand your possibilities of who you realized that you were? I'm actually very grateful for our wonderful musician here today for saying yes to being here today. I'm so grateful for her saying yes to the project that she really felt in her heart called to do. And I love the example that she's giving of really saying yes to something that's bigger than herself. And I just honor you for that. It's challenging sometimes, isn't it? It's scary sometimes to say yes. But there are things that are calling us to be more than we thought we could be. But part of the trick is learning how to say no to those things that are calling us to be less than what we can be, or things that are not really coming from the nature of our true being, from our soul being. And learning how to say yes to those things that are inspiring us to allow that Spirit to move through in ways that we had not dreamed of perhaps before. And learning to say no to those things that keep us probably in our comfort zones a lot of time, right? Those patterns that we get into of saying yes to things that really are not feeding us, that really are not lifting us or others around us, of saying yes to, I'm going to say something here that, may be controversial. But oftentimes we say yes to things that are really very good things that are not necessarily good for us in that time and in that moment or during that experience. It may be very good for doing community work out here and helping other people, but if we're doing that at the expense of something that is really at our heart's desire and really feeding us spiritually, then we're really not being honoring and true to our nature, and ultimately, we're not really honoring, I think, the Spirit within. And that's not to say that we don't do things for others. We do, because it feeds not only the others, but it feeds us as well. But if we're saying yes out of a sense of obligation, out of a sense and then we're fulfilling that obligation, but we're doing with an energy of resistance or resentment or it's draining us in you understand what I'm saying? I think we may not be doing service that we could be doing. We're not being fully present to the possibilities within us. We're not being present to the divine spark within our hearts that's moving us forward, where we could be giving our gifts in a way that are really inspiring. Does that make sense? And so a big part of, I think, learning to say yes is learning to say yes from an inner place and listening to that inner voice and being open to whatever way works for you to receive the spiritual guidance that you receive in life. So one of the things that Cheryl encourages us to do is to take the time, and here's some homework for you, and I'm going to give you a little homework, and then we're going to begin to wrap things up a bit. This next 30 days, this next month, begin to notice and pay attention to all of the requests that you receive for your time, for your attention, for your focus. Just begin to notice all of the requests that are out there in the universe, whether it be from a text or an email or a phone person or in person, to, face to face. Just begin to notice the number of requests that you receive. And as you receive those requests, she encourages you to take some time to give yourself a little space between the request and the answer that you give. One of the things she says is, I have to sleep on it. Take time to actually sleep on it. I like to say I need to pray about it. I often say I need to pray about it. And I think it's a valuable thing to do because I think it gives me an opportunity not to feel like I have to answer in the moment, but gives me time to stop and listen to whether that really is for the highest and best for myself and for the other in that time and that experience. She goes on to look at, okay, which of these requests are draining your time and your energy in life? And are they there is there a way that you can really say no in a loving way? Because the reality is, when you say no to one request, you're automatically saying yes to something else, aren't you? And if you're not saying no to some of these requests, you're saying yes to things that are probably pulling you in a direction that's not really fulfilling and feeding your soul. And ultimately, you're going to find that it's not really going to be feeding the other ultimately either. It may seem like it. They may want it. They may still feel like, they may even try to demand it for that matter. Anybody ever had that kind of experience? Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, when you say yes, and it's not really coming from your true nature, you're actually perhaps in some ways robbing the whole person, the situation, the circumstance. Oftentimes we find ourselves when we say no that we have to come up with all kinds of explanations, right? So one of our tips is don't explain. There's no need to explain. The need to explain really comes out of that fear of hurting someone, of them being annoyed or aggravated with you. But she says, the reality is that you don't want to explain, because the reality is you want to empower your yes and your no. You don't want to over-explain. You don't want to debate about it or allow the other person to debate with you about it. You don't want to defend, even for that matter. You just allow your no to be no. So she would say things like, I really wish I could help out, but I'm not able to this weekend. I hope that things go well for you. So just simple ways. One of the things that I also found valuable for myself is, the truth is, and I'll share this with you because I know that some of you are going to hear this from me at one point or another, I have another commitment. And sometimes that commitment is with another person. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a commitment to myself. And if I honor my commitments to myself, then I will more easily be able to honor my commitments to you and to this community and to others. So I'm talking to me as much as I am to you right now. So I want you to know that. There are times I have other commitments, and I need to honor my commitments to myself, to my spiritual practices, to my wife, to others in this community. And so don't take that I have another commitment as me saying no to you. It may be that I'm simply saying this is not going to work for me at this time in this way. Does that make sense? So,
But it's a strong no for you.
It's
okay that it's a no.
It's okay that it's a no. Yes, it is a strong no for me, and it needs to be a strong no. Absolutely. And I think that's true for all of us in life. We need to really develop that beautiful gift. And I'm convinced that one of the most powerful and beautiful things that we can do for our children is, see, interestingly enough, children have a very interesting relationship with yes and no. What they want is always going to be a yes for them, and what they don't want is always going to be a no. We also need to help them develop the understanding of a flexible yes and no, a flexible boundary. And sometimes the most loving thing that we can do for our children is tell them no. It's one of the most precious gifts that we can give them. But coming from a place of our own awareness of their true nature and our true nature. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can do for our children and for each other is to really honor that inner voice and say no. So have some fun with that this week. Saying no can really be fun when you really get into the beauty of it. Be gentle with yourself, and one of the things that Cheryl encourages you to do is inform those closest to you that you are working on a master's degree in saying no. And you'd like them to help you with your education. So have a great time. Let's move into our meditation time. So let's get into a relaxed place. The beautiful thing is you always have the choice. You can get into a relaxed place or not. It's totally up to you. You can say yes or no to it. So just take a nice deep breath if you wish. And as you breathe into the heart space, just let yourself be open to listening and hearing and feeling the spirit, the soul within your being. And listen within yourself about different circumstances or situations. Perhaps there is a no that you have been hesitant to say in your life. And just notice if there's a no that comes to you that you have just been uncomfortable saying. And allow yourself to listen to that soul, that spirit within you, to see if this is truly feeding your soul. And as you listen for that no, ask yourself the question, if I'm not saying no, what am I saying yes to? And then notice if there's a yes in your life, something you've said yes to that there really is a feeling and an energy of no. Something you're doing in life, or you've said you've agreed to do, or you're going to agree to do, that you really feel within yourself is not for you, is not the highest and best for you, is not feeding your soul. And be open to hearing and noticing. When you say this no, when I say no here, what am I actually saying? When I say yes here, what am I actually saying no to? And in your heart, just listen for a simple yes or a simple no. And as you breathe into that, be open to speaking those words in the right time, in the right way. A simple yes or a simple no. So I invite you to take a nice deep breath. Breathe into that heart space and feel the clarity and the peace and the beauty of being in that space of a simple yes or a simple no. Take another nice deep breath. Let your awareness come back into this room, this time, this place. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes and give thanks for the gift of yes and no. And so it is.